Well, good morning. I'm not Greg. How many of you feel like you lost an hour of sleep last night? Oh, yeah. The good thing about preaching on the morning that time changes is that I can walk out of this building today and say with a clear conscience, I didn't put you to sleep. Well, I was talking with our 2-year-old great-grandson very recently. His name is Jackson. There he is on the, he's the one on the right. His little sister, Nora, is on the left. And he had a little flashlight that he didn't quite know how to turn it on. So I showed him how he could turn his flashlight on. And once the light was lit, he came over and he wanted to look in my right ear. And he looked in my ear and he said, "Bugs in there. Get them out." Then he walked around to my left ear and pointed the light into my left ear. And he said, "Bugs in there. Get them out." Then he wanted to look in my mouth. Same result. Well, I really don't know if there were bugs in there or not. He said there were, so maybe there were. I don't know. But he was thoroughly enjoying imitating something that his mother had done with him on a number of occasions. And if God allows you and me to experience imitation of what happened in the next chapter of Israel's story, you will thoroughly enjoy it as well, I assure you. This is such an exciting chapter that we're going to look at here this morning. It's fascinating. It's inspiring. It's even funny. Let's look at what happened next to an unnamed woman, Manoah's wife, and then to Manoah. It's in Judges chapter 2, and let's begin with the reading of verse 2. In those days, a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, "Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You'll become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." Well, the woman ran and told her husband, "A man of God appeared to me. He looked like one of God's angels, terrifying to see. I didn't ask where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name." And then she told her husband what the angel told her. And then Manoah prayed to the Lord, saying, "Lord, please let the man of God come back to us again." He apparently didn't trust his wife. "And give us more instructions about this son who is to be born." And God answered Manoah's prayer, and the angel of God appeared once again to his wife as she was sitting in the field. But her husband, Manoah, was not with her. So she quickly ran and told her husband, "And the man who appeared to me the other day is here again." Manoah ran back with his wife and asked, "Are you the man who spoke to my wife the other day?" "Yes," he replied, "I am." So Manoah asked him, "When your words come true, what kind of rule should govern the boy's life and work?" The angel of the Lord replied, "Be sure your wife follows the instructions I gave her." And then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Please stay here until we can prepare a young goat for you to eat." "I will stay," the angel of the Lord replied, "but I will not eat anything. However, you may prepare a burnt offering as a sacrifice to the Lord." Manoah didn't realize it was the angel of the Lord. Then Manoah asked the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? For when all this comes true, we want to honor you." "Why do you ask my name?" the angel of the Lord replied. "It is too wonderful for you to understand." I think that's just so Cool. Then Manoah took a young goat and a grain offering and offered it on a rock as a sacrifice to the Lord. And as Manoah and his wife watched, the Lord did an amazing thing. As the flames from the altar shot up toward the sky, the angel of the Lord ascended in the fire. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell with their faces to the ground. The angel did not appear again to Manoah and his wife. Manoah finally realized it was the angel of the Lord. And he said to his wife, "We will certainly die. We have seen God." But his wife said, "If the Lord were going to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted our burnt offering or grain offering. He wouldn't have appeared to us and told us this wonderful thing and done these miracles." When her son was born, she named him Samson. And the Lord blessed him as he grew up, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. Well, this is Samson's backstory. He's the only judge who is declared to be a judge before he was ever born. Samson's name means strong, daring one, but his life ended a failure. Samson is a reminder of spiritual potential, but also he is a reminder of blunder when disobedience set in. J. Clinton McCann Jr. said of Samson, "The Spirit is most present in Samson's story, but with the least effect in terms of the accomplishment of God's purposes. Without human receptiveness," and here's the key, "without human receptiveness and faithfulness, God's gifts are wasted." And there's no better example of this than Samson. Well, his mother was told that he would begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines, but he didn't finish the job. Now, in this familiar cycle of the judges, which we have come, those of you who are in the study have come to see over and over again, Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. But this time, there's no repentance. And God turned the Philistines loose on Israel for the longest period of any of their enemies. But God pursues us with his love. He pursues us with his grace. And Israel had been steadily declining, but God was persistent in preserving and directing Israel. Now, just a little bit about the Philistines' religion. The Philistines' religion was ceremony. They lacked a real knowledge of the true God, and they lacked worship of the true God as well. Their religion symbolizes worldly religions with form and ritual without the atoning work of Jesus Christ. It is a familiar scene for us today in many religions around the world. Now, the story, of course, here is that Manoah's wife couldn't have children. And still, an angel told her she would give birth to a son. And her encounter with the angel was as miraculous as the once thought impossible birth. She believes the angel, and she tells her husband. Now, my question here is, how do you go from living a ho-hum life in Zorah, minding your own business, accepting the fact that you're not going to have any children, to listening to angels tell you that the impossible is about to happen in your life? Now, I think it's important for us to understand that these were ordinary people. Ordinary like you and me. Ordinary people. And they show us in many ways that you are what you listen to. We can learn to listen to angels. Now, I have to say, and I'm sure that you would agree, that sure beats the same song, second verse, that our that fill up too many of our days. The stock market going up and down. Political talk until you just want to plug your ears. And the fears of the coronavirus. Mr. and Mrs. Manoah show us there's another frequency to tune into. And here is the message of their lives to us. If you don't remember anything else, remember this simple sentence: be open to God, who loves to surprise us. That's what happened to Mr. and Mrs. Manoah. Be open to God, who loves to surprise us. And who doesn't like surprises? Here's a couple of surprise people. Or here, this is not a people, but take a look at this surprise book. Now, who doesn't like surprises? How do we get on God's frequency? How do we do that? How do we learn to listen to angels? How in the world can we be open to God, who loves to surprise us? Well, if we look at the Manoah story here and his wife in this exciting chapter of the book of Judges, there are some clues here as to how we open ourselves to God, who loves to surprise us. Now, what clues are here in this amazing story? And the first clue we see in just watching Mrs. Manoah and Manoah is to pay attention to the attitude of one who hears angels speak. That's a clue to how we open our lives to God, who loves to surprise us. Pay attention to the attitude of one who hears angels speak. Now, the attitude of Manoah's wife and then Manoah is a big clue to how we open ourselves to God. To hear angels speak, we have to practice keeping our ears open to God, tuned toward God. Now, how did she do that? What was her attitude? Her attitude was, God does interfere and intervene in our lives. So that was kind of an ongoing attitude that she was thinking about every now and then. So when the angel spoke to her, she believed it, because she believed that God does interfere and God does intervene in various ways in our lives. Now, we can choose that attitude too. Now, this extraordinary event happened to ordinary people. I just want to bring that out again. Now, I am a flawed person. Just like every person in this room, we're flawed people. I'm a flawed person. I need a Savior. But I had a similar experience to this that Mrs. Manoah had. A family member was out of work, and we were deeply concerned about this situation in our lives, and we were praying and asking God for a breakthrough in our lives and in the life of this person who was without work. And one night, in the middle of the night, I was awakened with a clear message that that person would be back to work by next May, which was at that point about 6 months away. God had a plan. That was the message of assurance that I received. The next morning, I dared to tell Mary about this. And she said, not until then, because it was a long ways away. But until then, we were assured that an end was in sight, a job would be there, and it would be a job that that person wanted. Now, what happened there was God interfered with my sleep and gave me a real, very clear message. Now, I want to tell you that I'm not tuned to God's frequency every hour of every day, but I am open, and I do believe that God speaks to people like that, and I love it when God surprises us like that. Now, it's interference to have a child when you thought you couldn't. And that happened to Mr. and Mrs. Manoah. Now, many of you know that we live in Sycamore, Illinois, but you may not know why. Well, we have a lot of family around the area, and we're kind of in the hub, but there's another reason we live in Sycamore. We live in Sycamore in great part because we had the stomach flu. Our family was together over Christmas, and someone got the flu. You know what that's like. Being Christmas, that person decided to gift that flu to others in the house. It was a terrible interference. We couldn't do what we had planned to do. And so instead of doing what we planned to do, we stayed home and we took turns running to the bathroom. You know how it is. And our older daughter, who's kind of a research buff all the time, she started researching and looking at homes in this area because she knew that I was going to retire. So she got on her computer and began looking online for homes that might be in this area. And she stumbled on, and I have to put that in quotes, she stumbled onto a website of the Association of Condos where we live in Sycamore. And we liked what we saw. And eventually we drove up to look at the house we now live in. And wishing we could look inside, we found that the door was actually unlocked. It was open. So just in case we would get arrested for entering, I sent Mary in first. And we looked at the house and walked in, and wow, did we like it. And later we met the builder of that home, and he turned out to be a strong Christ follower, which is kind of an added blessing to us in every way. Well, the rest is history. So here was the question that I was left with. Was God interfering in our lives with the stomach flu? Well, I just have to say, it surely looked like it. Believing that God interferes creates an open attitude in our minds. God may interfere with friendships that are not really good for us. He may interfere with plans that we have that are not really seeking His best in our lives. C.S. Lewis said he called God the transcendent interferer. But God not only, remember, pay attention to the attitude of one who hears angels speak. Because that attitude is God intervenes, God interferes, and God does intervene. God intervened for a woman who was unable to have a baby to become the woman who gave birth to Samson, who would be Israel's judge for the next 20 years. See, when God has a purpose to fulfill, God intervenes, and that's what He did. Now, we may not know at the time that God is intervening. We may not know why God is intervening. We may never know till we get to heaven what we were spared by God's intervention. You know, my mother and I talked about that when my dad was to have prostate cancer surgery a number of years ago. But the surgery was no more started than pretty soon here comes the surgeon down the hallway, and I thought, what in the world is he doing? He's supposed to be in there operating on my dad. And he sat down and told us we can't proceed with the surgery because the cancer has spread. Now, the question in my mind, and this is what my mother and I talked about, was he actually lived 11 more years, and 10 of those years were really good years. The question that we talked about was, would he have lived through the surgery? We never know what didn't happen, do we? We don't. Illnesses we never got, accidents we never had, premature death that never happened. Sin we never fell into because God intervened. So keep your attitude open to what God may be doing in your life. Be open to God. God loves to surprise us. Now, I think we need to be careful of this because God does this on God's terms, not ours. You know, being computer-oriented, as many of us in this room are, we think we just want to punch a button and say, God, okay, intervene. But who are we to tell God what to do? Isaiah reminded us, whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, and who taught him the right way? He doesn't need an advisor. Let God be God. And you know what? God's really good at that. Let God be God. That's faith. And you know what the Bible's definition of faith is. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, assurance about what we do not see. In a class by himself, God is a little bit like this baby. There's no one like him. There's no one like him. So be open to God who loves to surprise us. And how do we do that? Well, pay attention to the attitude of one who hears angels speak. But here's another clue for Mr. and Mrs. Manoah. Pay attention to the acquiescence of one who hears angels speak. Now, acquiesce means to accept without protest. It means to agree with someone or something. Now, few of us will ever spontaneously believe or spontaneously live as a Christ follower. It's a growing experience. And Manoah moved slowly toward God and accepted what the angel told him without protest. What was he doing? He acquiesced. He acquiesced. So when you're doing that, when you're acquiescing, how does that happen? What are the steps? And the early response is willingness. Willingness. If you thought an angel spoke to you, would you keep it to yourself? Would you tell someone else? Well, Mrs. Manoah immediately told her husband. Now, can you just imagine this? Manoah, hey, Manoah, I've got something I need to tell you. You may remember that we don't have any children, and I'm unable to have a baby. You remember that? Well, what I need to tell you is that an angel just spoke to me. And you know what he told me? He told me we're going to have a baby. Manoah, why are you looking at me like that? You see, people who believe God has spoken to them willingly share what they may not fully understand because they believe the message is from God. The early response to acquiescing is willingness. Now, Manoah's response is another clue to how we acquiesce. That's how Manoah's wife responded. Manoah's response is also a clue of how we acquiesce. And the latter response is, tell me more. Tell me more. He took a huge step and asked God to send the angel back so he could learn how to raise the boy. The angel goes to his wife. That's interesting. I mean, he prayed and asked God to send him the angel. The angel went to his wife instead. And she ran to her husband, and her husband ran with her to talk with the angel and ask what rules should govern the boy. And what is his mission, by the way, in life? And the angel said, your wife must do what I told her. You see, he didn't really answer his question. Just tell your wife to do what I told her. Samson is not to drink wine or other alcoholic drinks, not even to eat raisins or grape juice, nor eat forbidden fruit, and must never cut his hair. And there's more to that. If you want to read more about the Nazirite vow, you can read it in Numbers 6, 1-21. Because he's not to do those things, because he is to be a Nazirite dedicated to God as a Nazirite. Now, the Nazirite vow was essentially a vow to say a definite no to certain natural things in order to say a definite yes to something far more important, namely his dedication to God. Now, for Samson, not for everyone, but for Samson, the vow was for life. And Mrs. Manoah was also to keep that vow. Now, Manoah asked the angel to stay, and he said, if you'll stay, I'll prepare a goat for us to eat. I had goat and scrambled eggs one morning when I was traveling from Egypt to Jordan, and I wasn't impressed. Well, the angel said, I'll stay, but I don't want any food. Maybe he'd had goat before, I don't know. Well, the angel told Manoah to prepare a burnt sacrifice to the Lord instead. Don't prepare it for me, prepare it for the Lord instead. Manoah asked the angel's name. And he didn't know who he was talking to, by the way. Manoah didn't. The angel said, it's too wonderful for you to understand. Which I just think is intriguing, an intriguing answer, because Isaiah said of the coming Messiah that he would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So here's a question that popped into my mind, and probably yours as well. Is this angel of the Lord the pre-incarnate Christ? Is this Jesus showing up in Manoah's life? Well, perhaps. Many commentators believe that is who the angel of the Lord is. I kind of lean that way myself, but we don't really know for sure from the text here. And the angel saying his name is too wonderful to understand reminds us that God's ways are beyond our figuring out. So if you have things in your life, as I have things in my life, that I just shake my head and say, I can't figure this out. God, why are you allowing this in my life? God's ways are beyond our figuring out. Well, you can see in this interchange with the angel of the Lord, but Noah got nowhere with the angel. But his persistence in asking him question after question shows his willingness and his desire for more. Is your response to God willingness and tell me more? Manoah offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and as the flames rose, the angel ascended toward the sky, much as Jesus did when he ascended from the earth at the end of his ministry. And Mr. and Mrs. Manoah fell with their faces to the ground. And then Manoah realized, hey, this is the angel of the Lord we're talking to. And he said to his wife, scared to death, we're going to die because we have just seen God. And I think Mrs. Manoah's answer is great. She said, that can't be right after all we've seen and heard. If the angel told us we're going to have a baby, we've got to stick around long enough to have it. Pretty good answer. Stupid guy? That's not in the text. When Manoah asked God to bring the angel back, it was a dangerous and straightforward prayer that God delights to answer. You know, I saw an article titled 5 Dangerous Prayers and Why You Should Pray Them. Here were the 5. The first one is, search me. Search me when I feel critical or judgmental of others. Break me of always trying to impress people. Break me of fear. Break me of pride. Break me of discouragement. Break me of insensitivity. Stretch me to tell people about you, God, to pray boldly, to rest in you. God, stretch my faith. Lead me, Lord, even if it unsettles me. Use me, Lord, however you want. Now, these were prayers that the early church prayed. Now, they were greatly persecuted, as many of our brothers and sisters around the world are being persecuted right now as we sit comfortably in this sanctuary. But their prayer was not, God, take away the persecution. They asked God to stretch their courage, to stretch their boldness. Now, the question I have for myself, and I ask it of you, is will I and will you ask God to stretch you beyond your comfort zones, to stretch your spiritual understanding, to stretch your willingness to be used? A TV news crew that was on assignment in southern Florida filmed the widespread destruction of Hurricane Andrew a number of years ago. And in one scene, amid the devastation and the debris, stood one house on its foundation. And the man was out in the front yard cleaning up all the junk that was around. And a reporter approached him and said, "Sir, I just want to ask you, why is your house standing when none of these other houses around it are standing?" And he said, "Well, I built the house myself. And I built it according to Florida State Building Code. When it said use 2x6 trusses in the roof, I used 2x6 trusses in the roof. I was told that a house built according to code would withstand a hurricane. I did, and it did. I suppose no one else around me here followed the code." So if you want to know why some people hear angels and others do not, perhaps those who are learning to listen to angels are just taking the code seriously. And what is the code? Be open to God, who loves to surprise us. And how do we do that? Pay attention to the attitude of one who hears angels speak. Know that God interferes and intervenes, and just keep that attitude front and center. And pay attention to the acquiescence of people who hear angels speak. Well, that's the backstory of Israel's next judge, Samson. You know, as I was kind of living in this text this week, I was reminded of that verse from Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 2. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers. For some have done this and entertained angels without realizing it. Now that's what happened to Mrs. Manoah and then to Manoah. And I tell you, it can happen to you as well.